Hello and welcome to Angel's Costumes Behind the Seams. I'm Jeremy Angel.
And I'm Jonathan Littman.
And I'm Richard Green.
Today we're happy to release Jonathan's interview with Katrina Lindsay. Katrina is a designer I haven't worked with, so I found the conversation absolutely fascinating to hear her point of view from someone who has such a presence in the industry who I've never met.
No, nor me. I mean, I've never met her, and it is a very interesting interview. Just how multifaceted she is, and I'm very glad you got to interview her, Jonathan. But you know her anyway, don't you?
She's my secret weapon. She and I have worked together. I've associated for her. We did an opera.
Can you just explain what that means?
What does that mean? Yeah.
Costume associate is the credit that I was given, which is basically a glorified assistant. And it's quite a nice title.
Is that like American vice presidents?
I think it is an Americanism, and because I have been given that title twice, I associated for Catherine Zuber on Richard III, and actually at the same time, I associated for Katrina on Dr. D, which was a Damon Albarn opera that we created, a devised piece in terms of the staging. That Rufus Norris directed for the Manchester International Festival, and which went then transferred down to the E&O for performances during the Olympics. It was a fantastic process, and part of the reason why I was approached to join forces with Katrina was because of what Angels could actually bring to the project in terms of costume and manufacturing and process, and it was amazing. It was probably one of the most joyous creative experiences I've ever had.
Was that the production where you had the giant Elizabeth?
Yes, yeah,
costume?
we created that.
Is it still crated up here somewhere? It's massive.
It was
isn't
dismantled last year, sadly, because it was just
Was it?
it didn't look as if the production was ever going to happen again, and it was taking up the most inordinate amount of space.
And again, have you just explain that costume, because people didn't see the performance or see the costume when it came back. It's a phenomenal piece in every sense of the word.
It was a spectacular stage effect, whereby within the narrative, John Dee, through the stars and scribing, predicted the precise date that Elizabeth I should be crowned. And we decided that the ascension to the throne would be represented on stage by Elizabeth I descending from above, as in born from heaven, in the guise of her the famous coronation portrait, but in the instance of our drama, 15 foot high.
Yeah, it was spectacular and phenomenal in every sense of the word. It's massive, this costume. John Dee, of course, just was the sort of astrologer.
Yes,
court astrologer.
Yeah. He was Elizabeth's astrologer. She was devoted to mystical and spiritual black arts. There was a belief at that time that, and John Dee was working to turn base metal into gold.
Oh yeah, alchemy, the whole
alchemy. Ultimately, that did it in for him, and he ended up kind of being turfed out to
when he couldn't come up with
yeah, and he sort of segued off into the mad kind of freak carnival world.
Shades of Lord Percy and Blackadder with I've discovered green.
It's also with Katrina. If people don't know who Katrina is or they've not heard the name, the work that she has done and the projects she has done are very, very numerous. But there are some massive productions people would have seen. Harry Potter being an example, the Layman trilogy, Bend It Like Beckham, and those are just sort of more of maybe the more mainstream, theatrical mainstream that she's done, because she's a Tony Award-winning designer as well. So I think Katrina's work, I think, Jonathan, you're completely right in wanting to speak to Katrina, and I understand why.
Oh yeah, not just based on the personal experience, the breadth that she covers in terms of dance and opera.
Yeah, her body of work is quite amazing. isn't he?
it's staggering. And
Yeah.
to boot, she's an incredibly generous, insightful, and intelligent person.
Which comes out very nicely in the interview.
It
Yeah.
does. It does. And I don't think there's too much more we can say, because I'm really excited to release this episode, because I think she's got a very unique voice, and what she says and her process is fantastic, and I can't wait for people to hear it.
There is one thing that I wanted to add that hadn't got itself going at the point that we interviewed. Katrina is one of body of designers who've established a forum during this lockdown time called Scene Change, which is specifically aimed at theatre designers and their teams, to give a voice to the world of design and all that encapsulates at this point where people really don't know what is going on from one day to the next in terms of their careers, the development of their projects. And this forum, which is scene-change.com, full of opinions and little bits of art and points of view, just in order to give a section of our industry a voice and to make them part of the dialogue going forward.
We will link to the website in our notes as well, so you can find it there as well.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think it gives a very it gives an idea of the bigger picture.
We hope you've been enjoying these conversations. We've definitely been enjoying hearing your feedback. If you have any questions, reviews, or just suggestions for who we can interview, please email us at podcast@angels.co.uk, or visit our website, www.angelsbehindtheseams.com. Or you can find us on social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are just /costume podcast. And here is Jonathan's interview with Katrina Lindsay.
So, Katrina, I'm absolutely thrilled that we've managed to grab you to give us some pearls of wisdom.
Let's hope.
Yes, let's hope. But I'm sure that we will get pearls of wisdom, because I've known you for quite a few years now, and I'd like to consider you a friend, but I've
Yeah.
also worked for you. And I know that I've always long admired your process and practice, and
Thank you.
I've observed from afar, when I haven't been working with you, how you function with your teams and your management and producers and directors, and I've just always I always find your process completely inspiring.
Oh, that's
I think
lovely.
I'm not giving you a chance here to say anything, but
No, it's lovely. Carry on.
I think it's important that somebody with your wisdom and insight can contribute to a podcast like this, because, as I explained to you briefly before, we want to open up our world and make people aware that the world of design, which, is so multifunctional in terms of the disciplines, whether it's set, costume, lighting, but ultimately it's all about the collaboration and the process of narrative and telling the story. And just to get us started, what I was very interested to find out from you for our audience is, what was the light bulb moment for you in terms of your education? What made you suddenly realize that out there was the opportunity to take whatever you may have been doing, dressing up dolls or playing with action men, or whatever we do as children that take our imagination to a certain place? What made you realize that you could actually do that for a living?
It took me quite a long time, actually. I really didn't know that there was such a thing called theatre design as I was growing up. I travelled around a lot when I was a kid. My dad was in the Navy, so I was always in different environments, always sort of swapping schools quite a lot. But the one thing that I had as my sort of core link through everything was art. I always wanted to do art and paint and make things through clay, and so quite tactile and quite kind of a lot of color and stuff like that. So I always kind of had this idea that I'd go to art college. And then alongside that, I had also kind of been quite obsessed with, watching films, watching musicals. When I was living in Italy as a kid, my parents had the old Roger and Hammerstein's records, and I was obsessed with Yul Brynner and Deborah Kerr, and it was a real kind of I would just stare at this record cover for ages, and kind of loved all of those sort of films and musicals, and so when I was at school, I also did a bit of drama, but acting, and it really took me to the kind of last year at school to realize that there was possibly something that I could do that combined the drama and the acting and the storytelling side of life with the kind of visual, painterly craft side of things. But I didn't even really put that completely together until I went to art college, where I came down to London. I went to Central St. Martin's, and during the foundation course there, I thought maybe I'd go off and still do fine art painting or maybe ceramics. And then we did this 2-week course on theatre design, and suddenly it clicked. I just thought, oh, I love this. It combines everything that I'm interested in. It's the storytelling, it's emotional, it's visual, it's historical. So that was when it kind of finally
encapsulated.
clicked. Yeah.
I've got this picture in my mind of you as a little girl standing there in front of those albums with the bright Technicolor photographs of Deborah Kerr in that dress, with Yul Brynner standing there with his arms on his waist, and the color would have been so intoxicating. The way that color photography heightened contrast,
and the way that the color and the fabric and the way the light folds with the fabric, and I mean, it's interesting. My sister often looks at work that I do now, and she sort of can relate it back to all of those kind of childhood things that we were interested in, the
by osmosis.
Yes, you can see the little details that have kind of, and I am quite an instinctual person, and I think for me the element of play or being slightly not like a child, but having that sort of openness of a child is important. And so maybe I can see why she can see those references in my work sometimes.
Would you describe it as a naivety? In the way that art, that a school of art would be called a naive school in terms of its simplicity?
Possibly, yeah. I think it's about being expressive and open and instinctual and emotional, emotive. I think there's something in that sort of expression that I think has got a real honesty to it. And so maybe there's something in that I'm quite interested in.
And were you at school and at college, were you considered good at your craft?
I definitely was seen as one of the kids that always was in the art block, in the art school room, and I got on very well with my art teachers, and I suppose I left my mark a little bit on the art side and on the drama side in school, but then you kind of come back down to a big city and you're this little fish in a big pond. And
well, that move to London must have been quite an upheaval, in the sense that even though you'd moved around a lot as a kid, you were still within the environment of your family.
Yeah.
Was it an easy move? Did you come down, and was it all about? I know things were slightly different in terms of being a student when we were growing up, in terms of the support that you would have got from grants and accommodation.
Exactly, I did.
And of course, things were much. On the one hand, things were harder, but on the other hand, in terms of support, there was actually support there in the way that it didn't just rely on parents today.
Yes. No, I mean, I think I kind of I'd come down on a school trip to look at different art colleges, and I think then I just fell in love. I fell in love with the idea of being in London, and I fell in love with the college the building itself, and just the idea of kind of being able to do this sort of exciting foundation course in this big city. So I actually left on my 18th birthday. I came down to London on my 18th birthday, which was quite a big sort of
auspicious
moment. Yeah. So, no, I was excited. I was excited for it.
And any friends down here, or was it?
No, I didn't know anybody. No, so but I stayed in the halls of residence for art college students, so I got to meet people there. But no, I didn't know anyone in London at all.
Would you consider yourself brave at that time? or was it just a question of this is what I need to do?
I mean, I think there is a side of me that likes to jump in when I kind of get excited about something, or there's a sort of strong instinct towards it.
Yeah.
I've got a sort of tenacious, maybe I'm quite tenacious rather than brave. I have got a quality that I think from moving around a lot, you know, where I've had to put myself in different environments, there's a side of me that kind of will be able to do that, because I've done it for quite a long time.
I've noticed that quality about you, because I think that out of the many people that I've come across in our world, that you have an inherent ability to step into situations that are not necessarily 100% within your control, and just kind of find a path.
Yeah.
I think that's a quality that then is exuded to the people that work for you and your teams. They feel like they're going along the same journey that you are.
Oh, yeah. I think that's true. I think that's true, actually. The older that I've become, the more I can see that about myself and where that comes from, which is probably the pattern of my childhood.
Right.
And also that there is a side of me that kind of, there's a sort of, I feel it. I can feel, I think as a designer, I never necessarily have a huge vision of something, but I'm trying to feel something. So I'm always trying to sort of collect as much information in different forms, whether it's visual or text or, you know, music or anything that kind of gives me a sense of this sort of thing that I'm trying to search for, which is a feeling, which then manifests itself out into something visual. So, yeah, so I think I do feel my way through things.
Does that curiosity process stop or shift when you're not working or when you're working? Or is it all about building up your reference worlds and storing them however you need to do it, whether it's on a bookcase or in a computer? Are you forever examining the world around you and storing something either mentally or physically in order for it then to be drawn on?
I think I'm sort of mentally store things, actually. You know, obviously when I'm doing a project, I'll be gathering it and it'll be kind of in material form, and I'll be building up kind of piles of reference and piles of, you know, and then I sort of order it into ways that my brain can take. But I think I am a person that kind of, I'm quite good at sort of standing still and absorbing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's, you know, I'm a bit of a tortoise, really, in that way. You know, I kind of quite slow, but the slow absorption is the thing that kind of helps me understand it and be able to kind of, I think I gather my information in that way.
I think that's why directors come back to you time after time, and you're able to build up these remarkable relationships of consistency and collaboration, because I think that they sense that you don't waste your words, and your process, as you describe as, you know, whether it's tortoise-like or thoughtful or even ponderous, it's about, I don't want it to be as glib as thinking before you speak, but it's not wasting a thought. It's about corralling the thoughts and then pushing forward.
And it's, for me, it's about allowing the thought to be absorbed, and there's sort of layers of it, the different layers of the thought, you know, and that, you know, when you're working on a project, it is a collaboration, and there are so many different viewpoints and angles of it. So I like to look at something 360 as much as I can and understand it from that sort of completely looking around all of it in some way. That's part of it too, is not trying to just take my view on it necessarily. I'll have an instinctual feeling towards it, but I won't feel settled until I'm kind of all the different thoughts have sort of sunk into a place that creates the foundation in some way.
Yeah, because I feel that the process that we've just been going through with you know, that we're in with these podcasts, and how we're trying to draw insightful visions of the world that we all inhabit, is that a lot of people who will be listening to this aren't aware of just how many layers and structures there are within the coming together of a piece, whether it's a film, TV production, theatre, opera. The challenge of, apart from the logistics of coming up with the actual physical design, but the challenge of then presenting that design and seeing it through to the point that it's there in front of an audience, is the most remarkable process that I think I've ever, genuinely, I think I've ever experienced in my life.
Yes, it's true.
And
I agree with that totally.
I wonder whether, you say you like to have a 360-degree vision, which helps then finally form your final opinion. But does that mean then that you need a lot of time in order to gestate and then produce a project? Is a project better because of the amount of time that you have available to spend on it, or can that 360-degree process be expanded and contracted easily?
I think it has to be expanded and contracted, because each job, the time constraints are different for each job in some ways. So, and often you have to turn things around quite quickly, or you don't quite have it's all about timing, actually. You don't quite have the right conversation at the right time. So the conversation happens quite late on in the process, which is the one that kind of unlocks it properly in some way, or it does take time of process of drawing, and then suddenly something starts to happen. So, but the thing with our sort of modern world and with the projects is that often you're having to turn around things quite quickly, or you're working on 2 projects at a time in some ways.
They overlap.
Yeah, they overlap.
We all know people that kind of get off on the adrenaline buzz of keeping all those balls juggling in the air.
Yeah.
Does that petrify you? Does it frustrate you? Do you lose sleep at night?
I think I used to, and then I went through a phase where that was really the pattern, and so I somehow managed it. You find your systems of managing it, being able to keep the kind of freedom of things there's still sort of something open about it, the design and where you're going as you're going into rehearsal, while you're kind of trying to organize all your references maybe for another project. And I found mechanisms in my daily sort of to-do list of being able to juggle it a bit. So it doesn't terrify me as much now, but there was definitely a point where it suddenly went from longer, smaller projects that took a couple of years to actually bigger ones multiplying on top of each other, and just how to work that out. You also have great teams of people around you as well, and it's about keeping that communication going and pushing through.
That's an interesting point, because sometimes I wonder whether designers at the top of their game, which you are, and currently with the body of work that you've got on your CV, which is quite remarkable, of internationally acknowledged, but I wonder sometimes if you may take a job because you feel the need to feed the teams of people that you collaborate with, because of the importance of the relationships and keeping everyone in sync. One of the things that I always think about is, and it's happened to me a couple of times, where I've not taken a job that's been offered because I haven't been able to get the right combination of people to work with me, because the people that I'm familiar with are either on jobs or busy.
Yeah. No. I mean, I feel like I have never taken a job just to feed the idea of doing a job. I feel like I always take jobs that excite me. I get excited by the idea of it, and then sometimes halfway through it, I'm going, "Oh my goodness, what was I thinking? Why did I think I could do this?" But the initial contract of doing the job is because I'm excited by it. But similarly, if I got excited by something that was quite big, and my team, of like Sabine, who I work with a lot as a costume supervisor, if she wasn't around to do it, then there's other. Yeah, I would probably have to consider it slightly differently in some ways. But I don't do the job to feed the sort of the machine of us in some ways. I do it because I'm excited by the job.
Yeah, that's the right answer. Thank you very much. Because I do sometimes, as I said, I sometimes sense that there's a panic that if all the ducks aren't in the right place, the process will implode. I think a perfect example actually would be to mention that with Harry Potter, when the availability check was made, I presume it was an availability check in the sense that, would you come in and meet with John and
I met John. Yeah, it was have a conversation with John. Yeah,
you would have had a connection with his world anyway, wouldn't you? You've come across each other before.
John and I are sort of same generation, actually. And so, while I was sort of coming up, making my work, John was doing his as well. So I always knew about John Tiffany, actually, through a lighting designer, Natasha Chivers, who had worked a lot with me and Rufus. So I knew about John, but we hadn't ever met. And I also, through Stephen Hoggart, Stephen Hoggart. And we hadn't actually met until we met for that conversation, but we'd known about each other. And, and I'd seen Black Watch, so I'd seen some of his stuff. So, but that was actually the first time we'd actually physically met each other.
Because I thought the connection with Frantic and then that very interesting physical, if you like, fringe world of theatre that then fed into an amazing style of design and theatre and narrative that is kind of where we are now in the world in terms of what audience are coming to see in the West End.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the time we grew up in, and the fact that I had a company with Rufus, John had his sort of work that he was doing, and Stephen Hoggart had Frantic Assembly. I feel with Harry Potter particularly, that the people, the creatives that John put together are all people of a similar kind of aesthetic in the type of theatre that they would probably create. We're all kind of, we all believe in the sort of alchemy of what theatre can be, and in its storytelling and the use of the audience's imagination in that. So I think that's true, and I think probably some of it comes from the time that we grew up in, and the way we had to make theatre maybe, and the way we did make theatre, but also just the type of theatre artists we are, I suppose.
Do you think that process of theatre making is possible today? I don't just mean in this current climate, and then what will ensue with the work that we come out into.
I don't know. I hope so. I really hope so. And often when I have young designers in my studio with me, or people who are collaborating on projects with me who are sort of just recent graduates or emerging, and they're struggling to find jobs, or they're doing jobs where they're not building up necessarily relationships with directors, so they're sort of one-off things, and they're really, really in isolation. I always say to them, for me, I think the best thing you can do is to find your contemporaries around you who are telling stories that you're interested in telling, and build up your own company and your own way of doing it, rather than necessarily going into another designer's studio and just ending up model making and not really having much contact with the final product. I always think it's really liberating and enhancing if you can find people within your generation who are trying to say the same things as you through that medium, or who you just spark off, because that means that the theatre industry has the next generation coming through, which I think is really important.
I sense that there's, especially in terms of costume graduates, that there's a sense of panic whereby they're built up through their process of education to finish, and a sense of entitlement befalls them in terms of what direction they're going to go in. And I'd like to think that they maintain an openness and a willingness to do whatever it takes. I do think it's because of how they're taught, and I do think that that's then about finance and money and trying to make a living within one of the most expensive cities in the world. And also how London centric we all are in terms of theatre, and how the subsidized theatre and fringe theatre, in terms of how it was when we were growing up, sort of doesn't exist in the same way.
I mean, I feel like this industry is not a straightforward industry, and I think ultimately you find your own path through it. You have to navigate a way through it. I mean, I think as more experienced designers, we can help and mentor, and we can kind of be there for support, but ultimately, it is about an individual's voice adding into the mixture of the storytelling or whatever project is happening. And so you have to find that yourself. And for years I felt like an outsider, definitely, when I had my company early on, and I didn't really feel like I knew that I was part of the industry of it, but I still had this urge to tell stories and create pieces of theatre. And And actually, I now look back on all of that and think that's a brilliant blueprint for everything that I do now. So whenever I go into any project or have to work with any departments, I've kind of, that is definitely a blueprint, that those years of kind of being on my own and having to work it out myself, I use completely.
Was there a turning point when again, I asked you about the light bulb moment, but was there a point when you could say to yourself that, okay, I know, was there a production where I know what journey I'm on now, I know where I'm heading?
Yeah, I think, well, when I sort of got invited into the industry a little bit, which was through doing some work at the RSC, and that sort of, I think that was the first time I'd ever worked in an environment where it had different departments that would make things for me and, or with me. And I could talk to real craftspeople about my ideas and it would get realized. It was lovely. I mean, it was terrifying because I had to really convince myself that I knew what I was talking about to these people. But I also remember at a certain point just thinking, this is great. I can learn loads here. I can learn so much from working with all these craftspeople. If they were asking me questions that I didn't really know, I'd just kind of think about it logically or do some of my homework on it and be able to kind of navigate my way through it. So that felt like a turning point in a way for me.
And what an amazing environment to have that turning point in, with the security
that
a company like that can afford, in the sense that it's there at your fingertips and it's what you make of it.
Yeah.
Did you never then associate or assist prior to the point of graduation, step into your own work?
Yes, it's quite interesting because I sometimes, I look back and I think, I say something and actually it happens in a way that I don't necessarily know where it's going, but actually it's the right direction. So when I left college, one of the things I said to my tutors about what I was interested in when I left was that I wanted to be part of a new company. I wanted to be, for my work to come, sort of be created from the inside out through a rehearsal process and to be working with actors in that way, And then I got a phone call that summer from a young company that was starting something up to go to Edinburgh and do a show. They had no money, but, no money for me, but also no money for the budget. And we did this show where I sort of made all the stuff and invented it all. And
what was it?
It was called The Geese, and it was at the Richard DeMarco Gallery. And anyway, it won a Fringe first, and then suddenly the British Council and some other people wanted to take it on this tour. So actually, I found myself in the first 2 years of leaving college going on this amazing international tour to Romania just after Ceausescu had been overthrown, where I was doing installations in all these fantastic odd buildings all over Romania. Then we went to Hong Kong, and then we went around America. So, they took me because they didn't have money for the design. So they took me, and I would just create these things in these spaces as we went along. And it was amazing. It was an amazing thing. And and then that led on to me coming back and actually meeting up with Rufus. And we had a company, it was a place called Arts Threshold, which was an extension of the company that had taken the piece up to Edinburgh. And we had a basement in Paddington that we used to do work. And then out of that, Rufus, Natasha, who did lighting, and I set up a company. So, and then our work grew from there. So I never went down the assistant associate route. I was sort of straight in at the hands-on Fringe level.
Which, is so intriguing because that's another way of doing it, and just highlights the multiple entry levels and then how that forms your process. But was that was Rufus long out of being an actor?
No, I mean the whole company that had started with the Fringe one was set up by this guy Brian Asprey, who had been married to Yvonne Bryceland, who was this famous South African actress.
Yeah.
They'd set up the Space Theatre in South Africa with Athol Fugard and people like that. And Brian had been a tutor at one of the colleges, I think Lambda, and had this, his philosophy was, don't wait for other people to give you jobs. Why don't you, as students, form things together and
generate your own work?
Generate your own work. And that was who invited me into design. So I think Rufus was the next generation of that, had just not long recently graduated from RADA as an actor. And he was looking to put on work, direct work, and was looking for a designer, and I was around. And so we met that way, and then got on and actually did a few shows together, and then decided to set up this company. So yeah, it kind of evolved.
So the openness and just going back to having the 360-degree perspective has enabled you to function in multiple disciplines, and unusually for a designer, in terms of how you will quite happily and easily switch from set and costume and both, but not just that, but also function within television, film, opera, theatre. And do you have a preference? Is there a medium where you can express that makes you feel the most comfortable and secure and creative?
I think live work, I've done, I suppose the majority of what I've done has been theatre, sort of text-based stuff. But I do love dance. I find that fascinating. And I love the kind of physicality in the movement and how you have to kind of make your stuff work alongside that. I love that. So possibly I feel most comfortable in those areas. Yeah, I mean, I just know less about film and television and opera as well in some ways. But with opera, I actually love just specifically doing costume. There's something about the scale of the choruses and the pictures that you might be creating with costume and the amount of work that takes as well, that I actually really love specializing just in costume with opera. But for the rest of the time, I kind of love doing the whole world.
Is that paramount, though, being in a position to do the whole world? Or is the initiation that, Katrina, we'd love to meet you for this project, will you come in? Yes, I'll come in. This is your answer. Yes, I'll come in, but I'm afraid I'm only going to be able to do costume. I can't do, or I can only do set. How does that configuration work? How does it get divvied up?
I think it's usually people either approach me to do both, or they approach me to do costume. And and again, if the project feels intriguing to me or excites me, I don't mind. I've had so many great experiences where it's just been specializing in costume, which I've loved, and it's totally enhanced my work and my world. I do love that side of it. But similarly, especially with people who maybe I've worked with a lot, and there's we know the shorthand and we have a dialogue, I do like the opportunity to do the whole world, but I think sometimes, I don't know, maybe this is just me imagining, I think sometimes I'm asked maybe with theatre projects just to do costume with the understanding that I come in with a level of knowing about everything, so that the dialogue that we would be having as a team is about everything. And I think that sometimes I feel like I can contribute quite well when it's just specializing in costume, because I have a bigger understanding of the whole world of it and how that might be being created too.
I would go one stage further in that instance, and I would say that you're brought in because you create a very special balance within the creative team. And I think that's been proven project after project, certainly projects that I'm aware of, whereby your contribution and your process of working and the people that you have working around you, for want of a better expression, do not demand high maintenance.
Yeah.
In the sense of it's not ego driven. It's about the piece first and foremost.
Yeah, definitely.
As I said earlier, you and I go back quite a few years now, and I remember my first encountering you through the work that you used to do for Robert Shavara.
Oh yeah.
For ETO, and then your association with Ricky Beadle there.
Yeah.
And again, it was almost guerrilla work. As in. I
have a very clear image of you actually when I was doing Metrosexuality, and we were doing this big set sort of not construction, sort of set dressing in this environment, and you came down to the set. And I remember I was sort of, sticking up colourful paper onto windows and stuff like that. And I have a real image of you at the other side of the room, just there. And I love that.
It was in the school building, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I remember that too. And I actually think that observing that experience and then seeing the opera work that you were doing, Robert, and and making me realize, oh, that's what it is. And prior to that, I'd been at Angels for many years, and working away as a costumier and learning my craft and training.
Yeah.
And actually at that point, not really looking to expand it in any other way because of the trajectory of what was going on for me at Angels in terms of, as the company expanded, so my role and position shifted. But I suddenly, in the back of my mind, I think it was meeting Kafir, number one, then it was experiencing his collaborators and that world, and then suddenly thinking, oh, you know what, this is very exciting. This is very dynamic.
Yeah, and you can do it.
At that point, I didn't know whether I could or I couldn't, and I didn't have the machinery. But it was watching and observing, and then serendipitously, years later, having that opportunity to work with Rufus, who I had met through you because you had brought him into Angels when you were trying to clarify a style feature for Liaison Dangereuse.
I'd forgotten about that. Yes, yeah.
I had never met Rufus before. This is, for our audience, this is Rufus Norris, who's now currently the artistic director of the National Theatre.
Yeah.
I hadn't met him before, and I was absolutely transfixed by you and his dialogue and the kind of conversation you were having, which I've sort of took away with me and found absolutely, it was enticing.
By that point, we'd known each other for a long time, and had been in sort of running our own company, which was sort of probably dwindling by then. But we'd been through sort of many battles, I suppose, not with each other, but also just to try and get work on. And I mean, that's why I liked my trajectory in terms of my work, of being in rehearsals and being able to have those dialogues, really close dialogues about staging and about physicality and character. And I think Rufus and I have such a shorthand in that now because of those years of basically putting this stuff on together.
Well, and that was all perhaps brought to its zenith when we were all working on Dr. D.
Yeah.
In the sense that it was a devised piece.
Yeah, totally.
For a prestigious arts festival where it wasn't a question of there being money, no object, but everyone was prepared to explore what it could possibly be at its very best within the constraints of time and space.
Yeah, and that was the big constraint, wasn't it? Time, because, it was clear that it needed to be a sort of Elizabethan period kind of sensibility, but without the time to actually construct that, or in terms of making, or so that's when the collaboration with you and your relationship with Rufus and your relationship with Angels and our kind of shared history and friendship, that felt so great. I just loved the fact that we could do that together.
It was an amazing experience because, again, what it also indicated to me, and I think is very important for people to be aware of, is that bearing in mind the time constraint, which was really our only constraint ultimately, really, actually, was the fact that we could take stock from Angels. We could utilize a resource that was so remarkable in terms of how we then were able to work with it to create the world that you had envisaged, that semi-poetic, Elizabethan, abstract, balletic. I mean, we had everything. We had dance, we had singing, we had acrobatics, and flying. We had a real responsibility to the piece, the performers, and we made everything fit for purpose.
I thought to have the resource of Angels and, like you say, the sort of way we could kind of mix it up, the eclectic mix of everything. And it was like a godsend, actually, for that project.
And that wasn't our creative whim in terms of mixing it up. The piece itself demanded that there were elements. We had to tie in a contemporary world and, a political contemporary world and a philosophical world. And we would never have been able to have achieved that without the components and working our way through the racks and, whether it was a fill-in from the 18th century or the 1950s or a collar from Puritan England. It was just remarkable. And then to see it on stage in Manchester in that environment and then ultimately down at the E&O was a real thrill. And all of that is builds, of course it's part of your journey, but it's also the effect that it has on everyone that's around you, and it's part of it, but also an audience. We're back to the audience. It's the experience that you as a creative wants to hand over.
Yeah.
It's yours now.
Yeah.
Take it.
I agree. I think that's what I love sometimes about the actual job that we do, is there's all the different types of ingredients that go into it, which make it the piece that it becomes. And it's how you manage all of that, isn't it? That kind of...
Well, the alchemy of it.
Yeah, the alchemy of it. That's totally it. The alchemy of it is what gives it the energy, which then gives it out to the audience. I think it's magical. That is magical.
As a designer, just to touch on the costume angle of it, do you feel under pressure when you're brought into a project to have at your fingertips complete understanding of the current technical abilities that there are, i.e. 3D printing and computer graphic embroidery work? And do you feel the need that kind of science has to feed into your work? Do you embrace it?
I think for me, the starting point is always the character and the story and the sort of emotional journey of the character. And then when I'm sort of delving into that, maybe through drawing, which I do always draw, because it helps me kind of it helps me give the time around my space to allow my brain just to kind of sink into it. And a lot of the drawing I'm rubbing out as I'm drawing, but kind of that process somehow allows me to really start forming kind of the sort of reference points that I might be wanting to bring into whatever the costume is. And so maybe in that moment, depending on the character and the story and the sort of setting world of it, maybe then I might want to, look at the science, more sort of science-based aspects of the job, like 3D printing or whatever. But it will always, the core of it, the starting point is much more simple, and it's mainly about the actual character and its journey, its emotional journey.
I wondered sometimes whether embracing the facilities that are now available to us, whether sometimes the opportunity to use a technique can sometimes override what might be the narrative and the story, the backstory of why that item is what it is. And as opposed to it being a decision made based on budget.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of technological fabric kind of wizardry on Harry Potter? Is it?
I mean, I was just thinking Harry Potter probably is the one maybe sort of area, story where you might want to look into that side of things, because you're trying to create an illusion of magic on stage. So when we were doing some workshops for that, I remember I was looking at sort of kinetic structures and, how I might be able to kind of make some wings expand out of a back and all of that sort of things. But actually what I often find with theatre is sometimes the simplest kind of human-based...
sleight of hand.
Yeah, can be more magical. And I think that really works for Harry Potter a lot, actually, that you can't actually quite believe what you've seen in front of you, but actually the theatre mechanics of it are quite simple. Although they take a lot of detail to build up and layering, they're actually quite simple practices. But definitely, again, with the Harry Potter stuff, I know that, when we were doing the Dementors and stuff like that, I had this piece of superfine organza in my bag, which had been carrying around from a ballet project that I'd done like a year or so before. And in one of the workshops, we were talking about Dementors, and I brought it out my bag because it has this, I don't know how, it's amazing fabric, sort of Japanese fabric that has this sort of other quality to it. So when it moves, it has an extra bit of movement in it. So it's so light and so airy and can move in such a way that it almost looks like smoke. And so I'd brought this out my bag as a sort of like, there's something in this that might be interesting for Dementors. And so, if I hadn't known about that sort of technology of that fabric, having kind of been exploring it from another project, then I would have maybe explored that a bit more. But it was amazing to be able to kind of use a fabric like that, which is so kind of advanced in its technology.
Did that then end up becoming what you use for the Dementors?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it sort of dictated how I did it as well, because I knew that it would have this quality that you couldn't quite tell what you were looking at.
Yeah.
And that felt really interesting to me. It felt like it captured what they are, which is soul suckers, you know. They suck air and soul out of you, and it just felt like it gave that quality, you know, that you'd be able to sort of get that from it as a live experience. So yeah, that is what we used.
And there truly is nothing more special than achieving an effect in a live environment that needs to happen on a daily basis. The kind of the risk taking that's involved. There's a very, very straightforward, simple, magical device that we drew into our Fiddler on the Roof production. And it was because of our lack of budget. Paul Keeve was our magic consultant, and he was presented with the task, and I was very appreciative of the fact that, you know, we were all around the table to talk about it rather than just being presented with a fait accompli. And he took on board every aspect of what we were discussing and sort of delved into his kind of library of tricks and came up with a trick that he had actually developed many years earlier with Christopher Oram. And it was basically a living statue, like the kinds of statues that you see in Trafalgar Square, you know, Yoda and appearing to be floating. And it was then... It was once everybody had agreed that that's what was going to be used, and I saw what they had originally created as the clothing for that trick. It was all then ceremoniously handed over to me, and I was instructed that it needed to be, well, I basically had to create a world around it that fitted in with our narrative of, you know, 1905 rural Russia. And it was a wonderful process, but it's definitely a process that could only have happened in a theatrical environment. The world of film and television it would never have been as charming if we applied the same devices to film and television as it was ultimately in the show.
It's the thing of collaboration, isn't it? And it's also the thing of imagination. Like, there's always a bit in theatre where you leave a little bit of a space for the audience to fill their imagination into it, which kind of finishes it off. In film and TV, you have that less, I think.
I think in film and television, you have to think for them, whereas in theatre, you can leave thoughts to the audience more. And I think a lot of it does depend on the environment that you're watching that particular production in. But generally speaking, I think that successful theatre takes you on a journey.
Yeah, totally.
Feeds you through the world in all its glory. There it is laying out in front of you.
And it is the most exciting thing. And I think for me, that takes me back to being a child again, because it's unfolding in front of me before I even have time to think about it in some ways. So I'm really absorbed in it. I'm just completely absorbed in it. And I think that's what I like.
That's quite wonderful. And is there, just finally to kind of, you know, unfortunately wrap this up, is there a single piece of advice that you'd give to someone wanting to become a costume designer, set designer, you know, a designer within our world?
I think it's really important to understand what you find interesting about things. I was thinking about it as we were talking, that, you know, that it's to trust your instinct on something, to realize that every situation and every job you're going to learn something from. You know, all of those, when you were just talking about the piece of magic and Fiddler on the Roof, and thinking about the magic that we created in Harry Potter with Jamie Harrison, who did all the illusions with us. But for me, all the jobs leading up to that job are the journey that makes me able to do that moment, you know, understand how to collaborate and how to put these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. So, yeah, I think you have to kind of find your own sense of the voice that you're interested in exploring as a visual person, but also, you know, realize that as you're coming through, as you're kind of building up your portfolio of work, that you're going to be learning through loads of the different experiences, even if they're slightly terrible at times, but you do learn a lot. And that there comes a point where all of that learning really adds up to the job that you're doing. Follow your gut, follow your passion, and realize that it's a journey that it can stack up and that you can learn through every part of it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Katrina, I really, really appreciate your time.
No, thank you.
Hopefully I'll see you very soon, and I look forward to many, many, many more years of practice
and me too.
Lovely conversations.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's really great. I've loved it.
That was Jonathan's conversation with Katrina, and again, I thoroughly enjoyed it. This was one of the few interviews that we've done, and I'm happy to admit this, that when I was editing, I got lost in the conversation. I think what she has to say in her journey is incredible. And she's the first person we've spoken to that started straight out of university as a designer.
Yeah, and knew what she was doing and where she was going. I think that's an important thing.
And how sort of refreshing in terms of the journey of our podcast that we've got a practitioner who has just come into the world and found their own parameters and, you know, developed their own process through effort and through trial and through, you know, sometimes not working, sometimes working. I mean, in terms of the projects, I'm always, you know, that industry and that kind of that work ethic and you know,
also the juggling, not just at times on the project, not just costume, sometimes doing more than just costume and sometimes not doing costume. And it's like no two projects ever seem no two projects are the same. I mean, none of the work she does on any of the two projects seem to be the same. She's always changing and evolving by the sounds of it.
I think it's all about the evolving and it's about the people that she works with and the nature of the projects.
Well, and again, interesting to hear her talking about Sabine, who we know, and how important Sabine is to her and what she does.
The teams,
yeah. It feeds back into this whole thing we keep coming up to with the team of, because Richard and I know Sabine, but we don't know Katrina. But again, it's all these links that people don't realize about, and until you speak to them and find out, and which is I'm finding. One of the things I find amazing with all these interviews is just finding out everyone who's connected to who and how.
Yeah, you could almost do it would be an extraordinarily convoluted one, but you could do a family tree, couldn't you? A costume tree of the people who've worked before and then went on to do, and, you know, it would be a monkey puzzle of a tree, I suspect, but
a costume version of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, but the links are fascinating.
The next interview we are going to be presenting is Richard's interview with Jill Taylor.
Jill and I, again, go back a way. We worked together very successfully on some very good productions. I remember first ones we did with Two Men Went to War about a couple of chaps who were in the Army Dental Corps during the Second World War and decided they weren't doing enough of their bit by just looking after people's teeth. So they got a rowing boat and went across to France to undertake a bit of sabotage. Don't think it ended well, but the production ended well. I'm not sure that the story ended particularly well, but yeah, I like working with Jill a lot.
It's a great interview, and it's another fascinating story. Again, completely different from everyone else's. She's a very strong, determined woman, and it comes across in her interview and her story as well. And she even talks about how she changed. So it's a great interview, Richard. I really enjoyed it.
I think you've got a good working relationship with Jill, and it's been established over many years. And what I also have observed about Jill watching how she processes her work is that she's again got this amazing relationship with Charlotte, her assistant stroke supervisor, and the level of understanding between the two of them and enables them to move forward very fast and get work done. And I've also noticed that Jill's relationship with other designers in a sort of camaraderie stroke non-competitive sense, you know, because she'll come in and if she doesn't happen to be working, because she loves the industry, I presume, and also, you know, to earn money when she's not working, she'll happily kind of join in on teams that are working on other projects.
Yes, I mean, there's no ego getting in the way there, and she works.
No, and I think that's important.
Yeah, she worked with Rebecca Hale on, I think, one of the Ab Fab films, wasn't it? So yeah, it is refreshing because, as we know, there can be a certain amount of rivalry and jealousy within the
and compartmentalization, because your head's down and you're doing your job and you're you're stuck in your world, and that's it. But actually, I feel that there's a sociability in terms of Jill's approach, and you see her dipping into that person's project and her own work, and then someone else's project, and it's healthy because it gives you a much broader perspective of what's actually happening in terms of meeting new people and experiencing different things.
And I do also like the fact that that when we've got various designers in here working, our reception becomes some kind of social meeting place, doesn't it? You quite often see two or three of them assembled, just sort of chatting and catching up and stuff, which is nice.
We hope you've been enjoying these conversations, and here's a small excerpt from Richard's chat with Jill Taylor.
I'm the head of department, but equally I want everybody to be able to come and talk to me, because I grew up with, designers who they were very aloof and you couldn't go and talk to them. You couldn't share things. You couldn't ask certain things, some people. So I just have that open door. Yeah, talk to me. I want to know everybody. I want to know everybody's problems on my team. And, we're all in it together. We are a team making a piece of entertainment. So